The vision of Isaiah the son of Amoz, which he saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem in the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah. Hear, O heavens, and give ear, O earth, for the Lord has spoken. Sons have I reared and brought up, but they have rebelled against me. I wanted to tell you I'm using the American Revised. With the King James, I'm continuously going over to another translation in order to correct it, because it has a lot of boo-boos. So I'm using the Revised version. It's practically the same thing. So he says, sons have I reared and brought up, but they have rebelled against me. All right, now he's speaking of Israel, that he took care of and nourished and gave them leaders and gave them his law and told them the way to go in order to receive his blessing. But they have rebelled against me, he says. He says, the ox knows its owner and the ass its master's crib, but Israel does not know, my people does not understand. All right, he's comparing them to animals. At least animals know where their blessing is. They know where their food and shelter is. But Israel, who should know where their blessing is, that it comes from the Almighty God, ignores them altogether and goes their own way, like an animal that cannot be trained at all. Ah, sinful nation, a people laden with iniquity, offspring of evildoers, sons who deal corruptly. Right now he's referring to the whole nation, and they're covered with sins. They are the offspring of those who had already sinned and met with his disfavor. In fact, when they left Egypt, none of the original ones made it, except Caleb and Joshua. So the only ones who made it were the sons of the disobedient ones. They have forsaken the Lord, they have despised the Holy One of Israel, they are utterly estranged, or, in other words, completely separated from Yahweh. Now, Yahweh is not looking for this type of person. He doesn't need them. He doesn't need anybody. What he expects from his intelligent people is obedience in order to receive his blessing. It is obedience that brings blessings to the people, that they may long enjoy the fruit of their labor. Now he continues and says, why will you still be smitten, that you continue to rebel? Now, being as they rebelled against Yahweh, he removed himself from them, and they were smitten all over. They did not have his protection, and the enemies that were once felled by Israel in miraculous ways, we find that they began coming in and conquering Israel, and taking their homes and their lands and everything, their crops. So he asks them, why will you still be smitten, that you continue to rebel? The whole head is sick, and the whole heart faint, from the sole of the foot even to the head. There is no soundness in it, but bruises and sores and bleeding wounds. They are not pressed out or bound up or softened with oil. Now he's using this expression of physical sickness to describe the spiritual sickness of the Israelites. They are sick from head to foot. Now, the apostles describe spiritual sickness that comes from lack of faith. People who do not fully believe. People who start falling backwards. People who lose the drive and do not have the zeal and the energy and the strength to go on. This is a spiritual sickness. And this is what Yahweh is describing with Israel. They are altogether not just merely sick, having a little bit of sickness. They are sick from head to foot, as though there was no portion of them sound. Now he continues and shows them what this sickness really is and what he's trying to tell them. Your country lies desolate. Your cities are burned with fire in your very presence. Aliens devour your land. It is desolate, as overthrown by aliens. And the daughter of Zion is left like a booth in a vineyard. All right? Now he's pointing out the curses that have come about when they have removed themselves from his protecting hand. The land that he gave them, the blessings that he gave them. in a miraculous way, the enemy began to recapture and take from them. The freedom and the blessings that they had were lost, because it was Yahweh who was blessing his people. And he will not bless a person who does not have faith in him. We do not look to him, he will not deal with us. So he continues, says, and the daughter of Zion is left like a booth in a vineyard. Well, a booth or a tent or a straw hut, whatever it is. They used to make straw huts. Is out of place in the vineyard. In the vineyard there should be nothing but grapes. And now a booth in a vineyard would be not only out of place, would be very isolated, would be alone. In other words, Israel is left alone, abandoned. Like a lodge in a cucumber field. Likewise, a cucumber field, there should be nothing but cucumbers. So a lodge in a cucumber field would be out of place and isolated and abandoned, forsaken. Like a besieged city. Well, a besieged city is surrounded and cut off from all help. This is a condition with Israel. By their disobedience, they cut themselves off from Yahweh's blessing and protection. It's like a city that is besieged, where the enemy surrounds them and no one can get to them to help them out. If the Lord of hosts had left us a few survivors, had not left us a few survivors, we should have been like Sodom and become like Gomorrah. Alright, now, in other words, if there were not a few left, all of Israel would have gone down completely. There would have been nothing left. But there were a few survivors. Now, what he's referring to here is the last members that he took from fleshly Israel before Jerusalem was finally overthrown, completely destroyed. When they were overthrown at this time, there was no more anything coming out of fleshly Israel. So the remnant, or the last members, the few survivors that did come out, wound up in becoming the apostles and some of the disciples. And after those were gathered, those few, which caused Yahweh to say that they were not entirely wiped out because of those few, then he began to gather the Gentiles. And you find that the Gentiles came in and filled the gap of where of that which the Jews could not fulfill. Alright? Hear the word of the Lord, you rulers of Sodom. Give ear to the teaching of your God, our God, you people of Gomorrah. Now, Sodom and Gomorrah were two of the most wicked cities on the face of the earth, and Yahweh destroyed them. And we find that Israel is referred to as rulers of Sodom and people of Gomorrah. In other words, he's referring to them as the most disobedient you could find. And yet Yahshua goes even farther and tells us that they're even more disobedient than Sodom and Gomorrah. Because he says, and you, Capernaum, will you be exalted to heaven? You shall be brought down to Hades. For if the mighty works done in you had been done in Sodom, it would have remained until this day. It shows you now that if Sodom and Gomorrah had the evidence that some of the Jews had, they would have still been around. They would not have been destroyed. So it shows you the disobedience of these people. And Yahweh had every reason to be very angry. Now, all people are not wicked. But as a nation, they were a complete failure, just like any other nation on the face of the earth would be. Now, when religion tries to tell you that Yahweh is going to restore these same people to a position of authority, people whom Yahshua refers to as being worse than Sodom and Gomorrah, you know something is wrong. So you begin to understand that there must be something else. Other people that could measure up to this, to Yahweh's desires. What to me is the multitude of your sacrifices, says the Lord. I have had enough of burnt offerings of rams and the fat of beasts. I do not delight in the blood of bulls or of lambs or he-goats. All right, now Yahweh had commanded them to do these things. But why was he fed up with it? Well, where they started out sincerely doing it to honor Yahweh, in order to please Him, to worship Him, to receive His blessing, they did it as a ritual. They did it to be seen of men. They did it hypocritically. And Yahweh says He's had enough of it. It doesn't amount to anything. It does not bring any blessings, because service to Yahweh must be given with your whole heart. When He told those who were to sacrifice that they should bring the best of their flocks, it showed that they would give their best in His service. It pictures Israel today, who gives the best that they can. When you come to appear before me, who requires of you this trampling of my courts? In other words, who told you to come around my courts and do these things? He doesn't even want them around. He's changed His mind on these people. He's turned His back on them. He's no longer dealing with them, giving them laws, telling them what to do, telling them how to receive His blessing. He says, in plain language, even keep out of my courts. Don't even come around. Bring no more vain offerings. Incense is abomination to me. New moon and Sabbath and the calling of assemblies I cannot endure. I cannot endure iniquity and solemn assembly. Anything that they were commanded to do, He can no longer stand, because they were not doing it sincerely. Your new moons and your appointed feasts my soul hates. They have become a burden to me. I am weary of bearing them. All right, now this is all brought about by the change in heart, by people believing that they can deceive Yahweh by making a show of religion. Now these things are recorded to teach the Israel of promise, lest anyone slip or slide or is deceived into believing that you can deceive Yahweh. Now naturally the true Israel should have a zeal and desire to serve Yahweh with all their heart. But if for any reason someone of them attempts to deceive you, or if the cares of this world happen to overcome you, watch where you're going. You must not allow yourself to give a half-hearted service. It will not be recorded. Alright? I am weary of bearing them, He says. When you spread forth your hands, I will hide my eyes from you. Even though you make many prayers, I will not listen. Now this is plain that Israel had been cut off from His spiritual blessing. When Yahweh hides His eyes, when He doesn't listen, you know that they have been cut off. It says, your hands are full of blood. Wash yourselves. Make yourselves clean. Now the blood is not necessarily literal. Shedding blood is a sin. So it is a symbol of sinfulness, or of transgressing the law. Sin is the transgression of the law. So when He says your hands are full of blood, He's referring to sins. Wash yourselves, make yourselves clean. Now He goes on to elaborate. Remove the evil of your doings from before my eyes. Cease to do evil. Learn to do good. Seek justice. Correct oppression. In other words, anyone whose heart is right, who is truly trying to serve Yahweh, would do these things. They would seek after justice. They would correct oppression. These things would offend them if there were these things prevalent in the land. Defend the fatherless, plead for the widow. Those that are in need, in other words, regard, take care of. Now, according to these conditions, we see that in order for Yahweh to bring out these things, Israel must have just gone on and each one served themselves to the best of their ability. There must have been many cheatings and fraudulent goings on, like there are in some of the commercial enterprises you see today. Come now, let us reason together, says the Lord. Though your sins are like scarlet, they shall be white as snow. Though they are red like crimson, they shall become like wool. Now, both scarlet and crimson is a bright red, sanguinary or bloody. other words, this would be the ultimate sin. Even though you're covered with blood that you have shed, they shall be cleansed. They will become as white as snow. They shall become like wool, which is also white. So Yahweh does offer his people a way out, no matter how deep in the depths you may be. He will lift his people out as long as the desire is there. What he cannot stand is when people do not desire to do right, and then, regardless how perfect people think they are cast out. If you are willing and obedient, you shall eat the good of the land. But if you refuse and rebel, you shall be devoured by the sword, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken. Now, eating the good of the land just refers to his blessing. In other words, if you are willing and obedient. Now, this is the thing that he wants, if you are willing. A person must be willing to obey Yahweh in order to receive his blessing. He's not going to force anybody. He doesn't need anybody. And forcing someone does not do any good anyway, because as soon as you stop forcing them, they turn around and go back. All right. How the faithful city has become a harlot. Speaking of Jerusalem. In other words, Jerusalem began to make deals with all the kingdoms of the earth. It no longer trusted in Yahweh. It began to seek security from other powerful nations, and she is playing the role of a harlot, and she left Yahweh, who is the true source of blessings. All right, how the faithful city has become a harlot. She that was full of justice, righteousness lodged in her, but now murders. Right, the murders indicate contamination, in other words, sinfulness, breaking of the law. Your silver has become dross, your wine mixed with water. Right, now, in other words, everything has become contaminated. There is nothing pure anymore. Your princes are rebels and companions of thieves. Right, the princes or the leaders are companions of thieves. You have that even today. You find the rulers are in association with mafia and everything else. They're all associated together, working up schemes to benefit one another and disregard their duties to serve the people. Everyone loves a bribe and runs after gifts. Now, we've seen that so much, even especially these last few years, where everyone's after bribes. Now, we had the same condition in Israel, and we have it today, and we find that the world today is running parallel with Jerusalem. They're doing the same things. They both claim to be the Lord's people, and they're both doing the same acts of disobedience. They're serving in hypocrisy. They don't care for the truth. And the nations of this world are following in the same course as Jerusalem. And as Jerusalem was destroyed, so will this world be destroyed. Yahweh will not endure hypocrisy forever. They do not defend the fatherless, and the widow's cause does not come to them. In other words, it doesn't even come to their mind. Therefore the Lord says, the Lord of hosts, the mighty one of Israel, I will vent my wrath on my enemies and avenge myself on my foes. Now here the prophet under inspiration is going even farther than just the Israel of the flesh. He's delving into the last days, and he sees the restoration of Israel, and he sees enemies in their ranks. Now, these enemies will be made up of many who will come in as part of the Israel of promise. We're going to gather, or a lot more are going to join us than the 200 million. These will turn out to be unclean, like many of the Israel of the flesh. There are also many of the first witness who are unclean now, who are puffed up because of positions, that Yahweh is going to cleanse with the return of the prophets. He says, I will vent my wrath on my enemies, avenge myself on my foes. I will turn my hand against you, and will smelt away your dross as with lye. Now, he's only doing this when Israel is restored. He did not do it then. He does it after the 6,000 years, and this is fulfilled in the Israel of promise. All right, I will smelt you with your drosses with lye and remove all your alloy or all your impurities. And I will restore your judges as at the first and your counselors as at the beginning. All right, afterward you shall be called the city of righteousness, the faithful city. Okay, now the ones who he restores, the judges and the counselors to, is the Israel of promise. But he's going to cleanse them. He's going to chastise them. So this verse actually transfers us right to the very last days. One moment he's speaking of the Israel of flesh, and the next he's speaking of the Israel of fulfillment. Now he goes on with Zion. Now the Zion of old was like a harlot. In other words, it was Yahweh's capital organization and disobeyed along with the rest of Israel because it was made up of Israelites of the flesh. Now he says, Zion shall be redeemed with justice, and those in her who repent by righteousness. Okay, now in other words, it's going to be justice that's going to gather Zion. It's going to be Zion that's going to gather the just ones. In other words, it will be established by justice and righteousness because the members will be just and righteous. And only those members will make up Zion, and Zion shall be a righteous and a just organization. But rebels and sinners shall be destroyed together, and those who forsake the Lord shall be consumed. Alright, now this is repeating over and over again the result of disobedience. Now the Israel of promise must learn all these things in order to be able to express themselves as they go about preaching. They must definitely tell people that only those who give their entire heart over to Yahweh will receive His blessing. They must not be afraid. They must not hold any reservations, as though they hold a portion for themselves and a portion for Yahweh. They must give themselves over entirely. Yahweh is a reasonable God and knows what you can do. You don't have to work 24 hours a day, but you must do the best you can. Now he says, for you shall be ashamed of the oaks in which you delighted, and you shall blush for the gardens which you have chosen. Alright? Now, what he's referring to here is the oaks and the gardens that Israel used to visit, and there we find that they committed all kinds of fornication. I'm going to read a portion of Hosea. My people inquire of a thing of wood, and their staff gives them oracles, for a spirit of harlotry has led them astray. All right, in other words, they're giving their heart over to someone else or to something else, like a harlot. And they have left their God to play the harlot. All right, now as long as everything was going well with them, they figured they could do as they please and everything would be all right. Now there's nothing worse than a person thinking that he has it made in himself. A man is nothing without his God. But people do get overconfident if they receive too many blessings. This you have to watch. And the Israel of promise will always be watching, because they realize that they are imperfect and that the devil is working 24 hours a day. Now he continues, he says, they sacrifice on the tops of mountains and make offerings upon the hills, under oak, poplar, and terebinth, because their shade is good. Therefore your daughters play the harlot, and your brides commit adultery. See, they had everything then that you might see that they do today, you might say. Swapping and everything else, no doubt. I will not punish your daughters when they play the harlot, nor your brides when they commit adultery. For the men themselves go aside with harlots and sacrifice with cult prostitutes. In other words, this is the celebrations that went on. These were the cults of the heathen nations. These were fertility rites, anything. And Israel joined in and forsook Yahweh. And the devil led them astray through lust. And a people without understanding shall come to ruin. Okay. Now this is what he says they're going to be ashamed of. This is what he refers to when he says, "For you shall be ashamed of the oaks in which you delighted, and you shall blush for the gardens which you have chosen." All right, now it would appear that this is the same Israel that he's talking about. No, the blessings are coming to the Israel of promise, and the Israel of promise will learn these lessons, and they will turn away from them as though they had experienced them. They will see the result of the Israel of the flesh, how they have met with disaster. "For you shall be like an oak whose leaf withers, and like a garden without water." Well, an oak whose leaf withers is dead, and a garden without water dies. So this is what he refers, this is the result or the punishment of Israel. It will die. And both of them shall, and his work a spark, no, and the strong shall become tow, or tar, and his work a spark, and both of them shall burn together with none to quench them. Okay? Now, tow or tar really burns, and when it does start, it really burns furiously. All right, now, chapter 2. The word which Isaiah the son of Amoz saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem. "It shall come to pass in the latter days that the mountain of the house of the Lord shall be established as the highest of the mountains." All right, now the mountain of the house of the Lord is his stronghold, his organization, and the house referred to here is his sheltering organization. A house has a roof and walls and shelters you. The kingdom will likewise shelter you. But it's like a mountain because it is strong and immovable, immense. No one can move a mountain. All right, now, "It shall be established as the highest of the mountains." It's comparing the mountain or the kingdom of Yahweh with the other kingdoms. The other kingdoms will be smaller than Yahweh's kingdom, because we find that Yahweh's kingdom will will take in 1/3 of the earth's population, and there's no nation on the face of the earth that has that many people today. So it will be the greatest of the kingdoms. "And shall be raised above the hills, and all nations shall flow to it, and many people shall come and say, 'Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us his ways, and that we may walk in his path.'" Now this is being fulfilled today. In other words, when you come in to understand, you're actually coming into his kingdom. You're not coming to a Bible study. You're coming into his kingdom. The kingdom has started at the beginning of the 1260 days. You're coming to the mountain of the house of the Lord. And although you're very few now, it's just the beginning, you can expect some tremendous things very shortly. And people from all nations will be coming into the kingdom, the mountain of the house of the Lord, to learn the ways of Jacob, to learn of the God of Jacob. All right. "Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us his ways, and that we may walk in his paths." In other words, they are going to come in wanting to do the will of Yahweh, that the way, the manner that Israel teaches them. "For out of Zion shall go forth the law." Now the Zion is made up of Yahshua and 144,000. This is Yahweh's woman. This is the closest organization to Yahweh. Out of Zion goes the law. "And the word of the Lord from Jerusalem." Jerusalem is made up of the 144,000. The head of Jerusalem is Yahshua. So Yahweh deals directly with Zion. "He shall judge between the nations, and shall decide for many peoples, and they shall beat their swords into plowshares." Well, judging between the nations and decide for many peoples, in other words, he makes a separation. And naturally, the only ones that will be left are those who meet with his approval. In making a separation amongst the nations and the people, he is separating them. He is separating the sheep from the goats, and the ones who receive his blessing fulfill the balance of the scripture. And he says, and they shall beat their swords into plowshares. These are the obedient ones. The others will not be there. And their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. All right, this is one of the blessings of the Lord's people who remain, the 1/3 of the earth population. O house of Jacob, come, let us walk in the light of the Lord. All right, now this is a cry of Isaiah, and a plea, you might say, why not receive his blessings? All right, for thou hast rejected thy people, the house of Jacob, because they are full of diviners from the east, and of soothsayers like the Philistines, and they strike hands with foreigners. All right, now diviners or fortune tellers or people who are able to tell you the future. Anyone who looks to something like this is forsaking Yahweh, because the future Yahweh holds in his hands. Why ask somebody else your future? People who do this do not understand the truth. They do not know the living God. And the Israelites did these things. They forsook Yahweh and sought their fortune from soothsayers and diviners. They had nothing to do with the heathen. Right now, there could be nothing worse than, say, you people, Israel, making agreements with people who do not understand the truth and going along and copying their ways. Yahweh would just shut you off immediately. This is what the Israel of the flesh was doing continuously. Their land is filled with silver and gold, and there is no end to their treasures. Their land is filled with horses, and there is no end to their chariots. And now these are some of the things that the worldly nations have. But then Yahweh tops it off with this. He says their land is filled with idols. They bow down to the work of their hands, to what their own fingers have made. All right, they're carried away with all these things. And finally, they're copying the nations altogether, making their own gods, and bowing down to something they made. If they're going to bow down to anything, at least bow down to the man who made it. Not to the statue. That's even lower than the man who made it. But this is the way people can be misled. So man is humbled and men are brought low. Forgive them not. Enter into the rock and hide in the dust from before the terror of the Lord and from the glory of his majesty. All right, now these people who do not change their ways, the problems that will come when Yahweh begins to make himself known, will actually try to cover themselves and hide from the fierce anger of Yahweh, because they will actually know that their judgment has come. They certainly will feel ill at ease when things are getting out of hand in this world and they don't understand it, they can't change it, they can't have things their way anymore. And there's like an evil plague that's growing stronger and stronger and encompassing them, and they don't know how to cope with it. And the reason is that they don't know how to cope with it is because they do not have Yahweh's Spirit, and the reason they don't have Yahweh's Spirit is because they are not seeking it. And they will wind up in as someone that is burnt and consumed. All right. The haughty looks of man shall be brought low, and the pride of men shall be humbled, and the Lord alone shall be exalted in that day. Now, what he's referring to here, the pride of men shall be humbled, these are men who have gained prestige in the world and have become proud, thinking that they deserve this because they're so intelligent that they have been able to work out something that has made them appear to be successful. And this has gone to their heads. Ignorant people look up to them and they believe they are somebody. Well, the time is coming when they will not be able to solve the problems that are coming. These proud men shall be humbled, and Yahweh alone shall be exalted in that day, meaning that everyone who survives will understand that Yahweh is supreme and there's nothing to admire in a man's imagination or in a man's personal success other than his desire to serve his God. For the Lord of hosts has a day against all that is proud and lofty, against all that is lifted up and high. Right? In other words, a day that he has set aside just for these people, against all that is proud and lofty. Now, when you see anybody that is proud and lofty and appears to be superior to you, I had a new study this Sunday. A black girl came in, and when the study was over, she says she enjoyed it very much because I talked to her and not down on her. In other words, not down to her. The religionists of this world will have you feel their superiority and your inferiority. They want to show that they are an elevated class of people that are above you. And the main purpose of their preaching is not to teach you anything, but to show you their position. We have had one minister that Phil and Carl talked to, and he says after he heard all this and was silenced, he said he would not give up his position. In other words, he'll never give up his position, indicating that means everything to him and not the truth. Now he goes on and speaks about the lofty and the mighty ones. He continues in verse 13 and says, against all the cedars of Lebanon, lofty and lifted up, and against all the oaks of Bashan. Okay, now the cedars of Lebanon were tall, lofty trees, and he uses these to symbolize those who would have you believe that they're lofty and egotistical and puffed up. And the oaks of Bashan were great mighty oak trees, and these would symbolize the so-called great men of the world, those with a lot of influence. Against all the high mountains, now these would symbolize the strongholds made by these men, and against all the lofty hills. Lofty hills are those who stand out, that are very impressive. This is all referring to men and their organizations. Everything that man makes, Yahweh is going to destroy, because all these things are made for selfish reasons and do not benefit Yahweh's people. Against every high tower, this is a tower would be built to look out for their security. In other words, something to maintain their organization, to keep in power. Against every fortified wall, this is the organizations that they make for their defense, you might say. Anything that tries to defend or to preserve the organization that they are now living in, Yahweh is against. Against all these ships of Tarshish. Well, these are ships of Tarshish were great merchant fleets, and the men were very, very wealthy, and these are another portion of the devil's organization which have gained prestige in this world. And they gain this prestige for themselves, and they actually gain it by trampling on others and using other people. And against all the beautiful craft. All right, now this would refer to the beauty of their vessels, the prestige that they had because of the beauty of their vessels. And they were admired not only for beauty, but they were admired for their great wealth and success. And the haughtiness of man shall be humbled, and the pride of men shall be brought low. And the Lord alone shall be exalted in that day. All right, now these men who are very successful in the world, if you try to speak the truth to them, the greatest majority would actually think you're out of your mind. How could we give up this tremendous wealth and prestige and power that we have? What? For just Bible study? What are we going to get out of it? In other words, their minds would be closed. They would never give this up. Now, this would actually show you where the heart of the person is. Where your treasure is, there is your heart also. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that this will take place. This will be the result of 100% of the cases. But those who are wealthy will have a greater temptation. And most of those who are wealthy have gotten their wealth because of inconsideration for others. And the idols shall utterly pass away, and men shall enter the caves of the rocks and the holes of the ground, from before the terror of the Lord and from the glory of his majesty. Alright? Now, everything that man made, everything that he looked up to, everything that he made to help guarantee his success and to make him feel good and to believe that he was actually doing some good, will pass away, utterly be cast aside, and men will endeavor to hide from the terror of the Lord and from the glory of his majesty when he rises to terrify the earth. Now, all of the things that they have done, when Yahweh did not interfere with the devil's rule, and before Israel begins the 1260 days of publicity, they have more or less had their own way. But it'll be like a person who realizes that they've been altogether inadequate, that they cannot cope with what is coming, and they'll just give up and try to hide themselves, realizing that everything they have done has not gained them anything and will not be able to cope with the problems brought about by Israel. Israel is going to expose everything that they are doing, everything about the devil's organization, and why it shall be consumed once and for all, because it can never bring peace and blessings to all mankind. Alright, in that day men shall cast forth their idols of silver and their idols of gold, which they made for themselves to worship, to the moles and to the bats, to enter the caverns of the rocks and the clefts of the cliffs, from before the terror of the Lord and from the glory of his majesty. Alright, now they will, like I brought up before, they'll realize everything that they have done, the uselessness of everything they have done. All of a sudden they're presented with problems they never knew could arise. They thought that they had it made. They were choice members of the church. They were honored by the ministers. They were great men. They were the elite, the VIPs of the world. And all of a sudden they are presented with problems from the poorer class of people that they cannot cope with or solve in any way. Yahweh says that he will tread this world down with the feet of the poor. So it'll be the poor, the honest individuals, the hard-working people who have not gained any prestige because they have not had the gall to trample on others in order to get somewhere. These are the people that Yahweh will choose, and he will use them to further his own purpose on earth, and his kingdom will bring about a success unheard of in this world, and it will be directed against every portion of the devil's organization. So Yahweh will be behind his people, truth will prevail, and all those living a lie will be thoroughly exposed and want to hide themselves. They will lose all spirit to go on. Now, verse 3. Turn away from man whose breath, in whose nostrils is breath, for of what account is he? Or in other words, whose breath is in his nostrils. What he's referring to here is that man actually is nothing. If you hold the breath from him, he's dead. So why are you leaning on a man? Why are you trusting in people? Trust in your way. For behold, the Lord of hosts, is taking away from Jerusalem and from Judah staff and stay and staff, the whole stay of bread, and the whole stay of water. All right, now this is what he's referring to these as symbols of that which makes them successful. He's depriving them altogether, and he's removing their blessings. The mighty man and the soldier, the judge and the prophet, the diviner and the elder, the captain of 50 and the man of rank, the counselor and the skillful magician, and the expert in charms, I will make boys their princes, and babes shall rule over them. All right, now this doesn't mean that they're going to actually put boys and babes ruling over them. This means that those who are ruling will become inadequate, like a boy or a baby, unfit to rule. Now, why is this? Do they change rulers and put those who are inadequate in authority? No, this is not the case. It means that the problems that come up will make the rulers in existence altogether appear as boys and children, because the problems will be too much for them. They will not be able to solve them as though they did put boys and children in authority at this time. And the people will oppress one another. All right, now there'll be no love, no understanding between them. And when there is no love and no understanding amongst people, they will actually be a source of irritation to one another. It will not be like the kingdom where all of Israel will look up to Yahweh and have one God as a father, and we are all his children, and we amongst each other are brothers and sisters, all recognizing Yahweh and the truth in our relationship to one another. There will be a joy in association, but when they don't understand, there is no connection. Everybody else is a potential competitor, a source of irritation, and there is no love between them, and their association will be one of oppression. They will not love to get together and associate. Every man his fellow and every man his neighbor. The youth will be insolent to the elder, and the base fellow to the honorable. All right, this will be the association that will exist between the members of this world. This will show, too, that there will be no love, there will be actually no respect. The base fellow to the honorable, indicating that they will not expect knowledge, they will not respect age, they will respect nothing. And we find an ever-increasing flow in that direction today, especially with the young members, you might say, toward their parents. It's getting more and more out of hand. And it shall continue to get worse as the devil applies more pressure. When a man takes hold of his brother in the house of his father, saying, "You have a mantle," in other words, you have sufficient clothing, "you shall be our leader, and this heap of ruin shall be under your rule." All right? In other words, they're going to try to make him solve the situation, this heap of ruins, this mess of the enemy. You rule, straighten it out. In that day he will speak out, saying, "I will not be a healer. In my house there is neither bread nor mantle. You will not make me leader of the people." In other words, I'm not going to take over the mess that we've gotten into, meaning that they will not be eager to solve the problems knowing that they cannot solve them. No one will want to take charge. All right, now this is actually, this in a way happened to Jerusalem, but it will primarily fulfilled in the last days when actually Yahweh's name is vindicated and when the judgment will prevail on the earth. For Jerusalem has stumbled and Judah has fallen, because their speech and their deeds are against the Lord, defying his glorious presence. Alright? Now, over and over again, Yahweh is referring to the sin of Judah, to the sin of all mankind when they turn their backs to Yahweh. This should not be, this should not have to be. Yahweh is not forcing you, but those who desire to do righteousness should love their God. They should miss him, they should speak to him, they should pray all the time, they should look to him all the time, seek his guidance all the time. And this should be a natural emotion of all those who love justice and righteousness. Their partiality witnesses against them. In other words, the look on their faces gives them away. They know their guilt. They know what they've done. And they know the results. They are guilty. But apparently they are too demonized to do anything about it. They proclaim their sin like Sodom. They do not hide it. In other words, they boast that they are just like Sodom. They are disobedient. They don't even try to hide it. So it shows on their faces. And this is what made the way ever so much more angry. Because in many cases they knew what they were doing. Woe to them, for they have brought evil upon themselves. Tell the righteous that it shall be well with them, for they shall eat the fruit of their deeds. Woe to the wicked, it shall be ill with him, for what his hands have done shall be done to him. All right, we just showing you the two roads that man has a choice over, or he's a free moral agent. My people, children are their oppressors, or in other words, children are their masters. A child is not developed, is not prepared, is not adequate to rule. It's referring to these men who are as children. And there are those who are young in the truth that actually can be elders because of their faith and their understanding and their show of devotion, their proof of devotion to the way. All right, my people, children are their oppressors or masters, and women rule over them. And what he's telling you here is that those who have no authority, who actually are not prepared, or are altogether inadequate to rule, are ruling over them. O my people, your leaders mislead you. Now see, he's beginning to straighten it out. It's not women, it's not children. It's the leaders who don't know what they're doing. They're like children or like people who have not been ordained or given the authority from the way. My people, your leaders mislead you and confuse the course of your paths. Now, the true leaders of Yahweh's people naturally must be appointed by Yahweh. But the leaders that have come into power or have been elected by the people have not been appointed by Yahweh, and for this reason the Spirit is not on them and they don't know which way they're going. The Lord has taken his place to contend. He stands to judge his people. In other words, to contend or take a stand against them, to oppose them. The Lord enters into judgment to the elders and princes of his people. It is you who have devoured the vineyard. The spoil of the poor is in your houses, the spoil or the plunder. In other words, a nation that invades another nation and takes the goods of the nation that they conquer has plundered them, has invaded them, and their spoil is taken away. This refers to the rich or the successful ones taking what actually belongs to the poor, because it is the poor who's actually doing the work. And we find that the poor are the ones doing the work, are the ones who are in need. They're just able to exist from week to week. This should not be. What do you mean by crushing my people, by grinding the face of the poor, says the Lord God of hosts? This is actually causing them to suffer, rubbing it in, you might say, and taking advantage of the poor. The Lord said, because the daughters of Zion are haughty and walk with outstretched necks, glancing wantonly with their eyes. In other words, they're like women who are all dressed up to kill, glancing around with their eyes, trying to catch the eyes of some man, and mincing along as they go. In other words, mincing, they're walking with an effect with the daintiness. It's a put-on walk to attract. Tinkling with their feet. This is the way he's referring to the Zion of old. A Zion who was supposed to have her heart devoted to Yahweh. And you find that it's like a woman who has her heart all over, looking all over, trying to get attention somewhere else, affecting a dainty walk or a different walk just to get attention. And with all this, when they're doing this, naturally their heart is not in Yahweh at all. This is the Zion of old. This is the Zion of the flesh. Mincing along as they go, tinkling with their feet. The Lord will smite with a scab the heads of the daughters of Zion, and the Lord will lay bare their secret parts, or expose them. Or expose them meaning expose their hidden purposes, what they are doing. Zion was supposed to be Yahweh's organization. He will expose them. And he's also going to expose ever so much more the organizations which are in authority in the last days, because we've never had such monstrous organizations, and never has any organization on the face of the earth had such effect as the organizations today. In that day, the Lord will take away the finery of the anklets, the headbands, and the crescents, the pendants, the bracelets, and the scarves. These are all the paraphernalia that they put on to attract. In other words, they were not the real person. They were all made up. They were something else, using all these things to turn men's heads. You might say. In other words, what Yahweh is bringing out that their heart is not where it should be. But the pendants, the bracelets, and the scarves, the headdresses, the armlets, the sashes, the perfume boxes, and the amulets, the signet rings and nose rings, the festal robes, the mantles, the cloaks, and the handbags, the garments of gauze, the linen garments, the turbans, and the veils. Instead of perfume, there will be rottenness, and instead of a girdle, a rope, and instead of a well-set hair, baldness. Okay, now, as beautiful as they try to present themselves, as beautiful as these churches and these organizations try to appear before men, they will actually be exposed so that they will actually look rotten and look as a person who is most loathsome rather than one who is to be desired. This will be brought about by the exposing of Yahweh's truth against these organizations symbolized by women. And instead of a rich robe, a girding of sackcloth. All right, now instead of a rich, attractive robe, they're going to put sackcloth. Well, sackcloth is a robe of mourning, sorrow. This means that this will be the emotions that will be expressed by these organizations when Yahweh is through with them. They will no longer rejoice. Instead of beauty, shame. Shame comes about when they are thoroughly exposed. Your men shall fall by the sword, and your mighty men in battle. Now, showing you that these women are actually men, organizations made up of men, and he's not referring to literal women. And her gates shall lament and mourn. Ravaged she shall sit upon the ground. Other translations bring out that the city shall sit forlorn, indicating that it is an organization made up of men, symbolically referred to as women. All right. Are there any questions on the study? Kept it about an hour.
Chapter 1, verse 8, daughter of Zion is Israel of old, right?
Chapter 1, verse 8.
How come the Zion of today is 144,000 with the election, right? The Zion of old was just Israel, right?
Yeah. Zion was a mountain, and Jerusalem was built there. So it's actually, it was actually only Jerusalem, but the mountain itself pictured Yahweh's mountain, Yahweh's organization. It didn't have any operation. In the old, you might say, it was similar with Jerusalem. There was a Mount Zion and Jerusalem.
All typified with
Yahweh's mountain. Yeah. Yes. Verse 23. Yeah, speaks about what? Glasses? Oh, you have the King James.
It's the glasses and the finer and
Well, every translation brings out something else here. Some of these things, if you look them up, you understand them. I'll just show you what Moffat has to say. On that day, the Lord will deprive them of their finery of anklets, tiaras, necklaces, earrings, bracelets, veils, headbands, armlets, and sashes, scent bottles, charms, signet rings, and nose rings, robes of state, mantles, shawls, and persons, gauze, linen, turbans, and wrappers. Now, yours says what? Glasses? Well, it would be one of these, but actually just what he translated I wouldn't know. Mirrors. Yeah. It could be that they used something reflective that they wore. Yes. Looking glasses. Well, everything that a woman uses to beautify herself, in other words. Every translator brings out a little differently. Some of them I recognize and others I don't, because the mode of dress at that time was a little different. They wore things that we didn't wear. Yes, Paul. For you shall be ashamed of the oaks in which you delighted, and you shall blush for the gardens which you have chosen. Well, it was the oaks. See, they would get they would go to a forest where there was a lot of shade from the heat, where they would be protected from the scorching heat, and they would kind of hide themselves. And there they would celebrate these heathen worships, which would actually be nothing more or less than a sexual ritual with the goddess. Hosea 4:12 and 14. I can read that again for you. To 14. I'll read it. My people inquire of a thing of wood, and their staff gives them oracles. For a spirit of harlotry has led them astray. I know the spirit of harlotry, in other words, is a duplicity of devotion. They're changing their devotion from the way to something else. They have left their God to play the harlot. Okay? They sacrifice on the tops of mountains and make offerings upon the hills, under oak, poplar, and terebinth, because their shade is good. Okay? Now, therefore your daughters play the harlot, and your brides commit adultery. They used to actually do these things in this worship, this ritual. I will not punish your daughters when they play the harlots, nor your brides when they commit adultery. For the men themselves go aside with harlots and sacrifice with cult prostitutes. They actually used to have paid prostitutes in the temple that they would perform with. And the people without understanding shall come to ruin. Of Isaiah, the son of Amos.